My name is Matt Emery, and I'm just your average, everyday local history nerd. I started the Round the Bend Now and Then audio podcast to shine a light on South Bend and Mishawaka's history and how that has an impact on our present-day lives. We're over 20 episodes in, and it's been a blast so far interviewing folks to help tell our area stories. If you haven't listened yet, I highly encourage you to do so. It's on all of the popular podcast apps or on the website included in the show notes to this video. The podcast is audio only, but I wanted to start making projects with a visual component as well, but with the exact same intent as the podcast, to teach folks about local history and what impact our past has on our present. This is my second Round the Bend Now and Then video, and I thank you ahead of time for spending your valuable time watching. Please be sure to reach out and let me know your thoughts. All of my contact information is in the show notes or flashing across the screen. If you enjoyed, please be sure to share, like, and subscribe. Over the years, I had heard the name Mama Chickie here and there, and I knew that she had ran a brothel here in South Bend years ago, but I didn't know how much truth there was to it. Then once I joined the local Facebook history group some years ago, I learned that, yes, she was real, and yes, she was in charge of several, as the South Bend Tribune would call them, houses of ill fame. I learned on those Facebook posts that her name was Edith McShann, and she lived to be 100 years old, passing away in 1999, and I truly didn't know how infamous she was around the city. I mean, there were all types of different people commenting on the Facebook posts about bumping into her at gas stations, taking care of her at grocery stores, and so forth. And when you think of prostitution in madams and illegal brothels, you wouldn't expect some of these comments the people were saying on Facebook. For example, I used to be her cab driver, such a sweet lady. Met her at the grocery store I worked at. She was always a polite, kind woman, always beautifully dressed with an amazing smile. A retired police officer even commented, "Worked the beat where she lived. She was a true lady. Always told us officers if anyone was talking about any crimes or threats to officers." Literally dozens of these types of comments, but there were also a lot of comments like these. She was left alone because she knew many important politicians. Lawmen turned a blind eye. Many politicians were her customers. With all of that, I always wondered, how do you get to that point? When most women are 75 years old, they're tending to their grandchildren or playing words with friends. They're not running an illegal prostitution operation in the near west side of South Bend's notoriously crime-riddled Chapin and Western area of the 1960s and 70s. If what these Facebook comments were saying were true about how she operated, basically in the open and never really getting in serious trouble, I am seriously curious how that happens. I wanted to dive deeper and learn more about the legendary, or infamous, Edith McShann, better known as Mama Chickie. And as I learn, and as you'll soon learn, there are many, many, many layers to the story of Mama Chickie. Here she was, a lifelong criminal with decades and decades of arrests, but she was also a well-respected woman in the community, helping the poor, providing tips to police about criminal activity, and by all accounts, a very polite, sweet, gracious woman. Regardless of her profession and some of her past transgressions, I just could not help but be in awe of her. From the 19-teens until the early 1980s, she lived a life of crime. And for most of those years, she was her own boss, running things. And as you know, that wasn't necessarily at a time when women were easily afforded that type of power. But somehow over the years, Edith McShann earned her spot as one of South Bend, Indiana's most infamous citizens ever. While this is not at all a biography on Mama Chickie, Lord knows if she would have written a book, some of South Bend's highest-ranking officials would definitely be losing sleep over what details she would share. And in 1999, South Bend Tribune reporter Joseph Ditz actually met with her and wrote a wonderful article about her 100th birthday that really does a fabulous job of telling her life story. In this video, I simply share what I learned about Mama Chickie's life from the 85 different South Bend Tribune newspaper articles that I found dating from 1926 to 1999. And as you'll see, this woman lived a life. Please note that this is not an advertisement or an endorsement of prostitution at all. I understand that many lives are ruined and have been negatively affected by it. When you research old Tribune articles on Mama Chickie, you find out very fast that the majority of them are focused on addresses in the general vicinity of Chapin and Western. Over the next minute or so, I'll share what the area looks like now. In this clip, I'm standing on the northeast corner of the Chapin and Western intersection. As you can see, that's the Croc Center across the street, a Save-A-Lot grocery store, a medical facility, and public housing apartments. Here is just another angle of the area as I'm standing across from the Croc Center in a parking lot near where the northwest corner of Chapin and Western is. As you can see, not much going on here. An empty parking lot, traffic, and some cars zooming by. Here is an aerial of the Chapin and Western area now, and I'm sure that many folks that drive or walk past the intersection or even frequent the Croc Center have no clue what once stood here and what once all went down around these parts. And as you'll hear, a whole bunch went down. And the great majority of all that went down in regards to the story of Mama Chickie went down on this tiny little brick road called Pine Street between Western and Napier, where Mama Chickie ran two different brothels. Before we dive into the life and times of Mama Chickie, it's important that I point out where her houses of ill fame were located. In the 1960s and 70s, the addresses of both 316 and 307 Pine Street were in the South Bend Tribune quite often, and there was no secret what was going on inside of them. This aerial shows where the houses once were. This is the empty lot where 316 Pine Street once stood. It seems that this was the first of the two Pine Street addresses that Mama Chickie operated a brothel at. It was noted in the South Bend Tribune multiple times for arrests and being a house of ill fame. In 1989, the house met its demise. Now, it says it was an electrical fire, but many folks probably have other supernatural theories on how the fire actually started. An empty lot has stood there ever since. Here are two different angles of the empty lot where 307 Pine Street once stood. This is the house that, from what I can tell, garnered the most attention and notoriety. Many mentions of this address were in the newspaper for several decades. Obviously, arrests, some shootings, burglaries, robberies, and overall, just well documented in the South Bend Tribune. Just to foreshadow how infamous 307 Pine Street was, when the house was demolished in 1983, they sent a newspaper reporter out there to write an article about it. It was once the home of Mama Chickie and her gang of soiled doves, the paper noted. And they wanted an 83-year-old Mama Chickie's thoughts about the house, as she was actually living across the street at the time. I love this quote, and I can just imagine an older lady who has seen it all saying it. Quote, "That place is cold. I got no remorse to see it go. It was big on secrets like you wouldn't know. But right here," she taps her lips with a long forefinger, "this is the shortest way to a noose, and that old house and me don't say nothing." That quote right there, like most of the story behind Mama Chickie, could have been written in a Hollywood movie. But nope, it wasn't a movie. It was an 83-year-old freshly retired madam commenting on the brothel where she once reigned queen. And when Mama Chickie reigned queen, Chapin and Western did not look like this aerial that we see today. Because when Mama Chickie's name was infamous around Chapin and Western, it looked like this 1952 aerial. Many, many, many businesses and storefronts were all up and down Chapin and Western. And by the 50s and 60s, many of those businesses were full of vice, drinking, drugs, gambling, and of course, prostitution, where the services of folks like Mama Chickie and her gals were never more than a stone's throw away. The next few pictures show the Chapin Western area of that time, and as you'll see, it looks nothing like that now. I want to thank the History Museum for these pictures. Most of the pictures were taken in the 1960s, soon before the whole area was razed and demolished as a part of the city's urban renewal plan. So as you'll see, the area looked quite scary by this time. This is looking south down Chapin near Western, and the only recognizable landmark that still stands is the train viaduct. The building you're looking at there was on the southwest corner of Chapin and Western, where the Kroc Center is now. You're looking west down Western Avenue to the right. This photographer was standing on the viaduct looking north on Chapin. The buildings you see are on the east side of Chapin, and public housing apartments are there now. This is the west side of Chapin Street looking north. Again, the Kroc Center is where those buildings were at. Like I mentioned earlier, South Bend Tribune reporter Joseph Ditz wrote a great article on Mama Chickie in 1999 when she turned 100. In that article, he wrote about her early life, and I'll share a little bit of that here. She was born in 1900 and spent the first 10 years of her life in Albuquerque, New Mexico, spending most of that time being raised by her all-Irish grandmother, who was illiterate. They bounced back and forth a bit between there and Chicago, and it seems as if little Edith was a bit mischievous and had quite a bit of an independent streak, because by the age of 12, she said she knew she didn't want to be a domestic servant cleaning for anyone. She, quote, yearned for the slick threads and lifestyle of the fancy ladies who earn money in bed. At 12 years old, she started learning the prostitution game, and for the next few decades, she traveled the country going from one city's red light district to the next, working as a, quote, freelance prostitute. She discovered South Bend in the 1920s, but didn't settle down here permanently until sometime in the 1950s, where by then, she knew she could make more money by establishing herself as a madam and setting up shop near Chapin Street, which at that time was, quote, an ethnic melting pot and a hangout for African Americans. It was known as Little Vegas, as the city's hub for underground economics. Legitimate shops sat juxtaposed to bootlegging, gambling, and prostitution. At some point, she picked up the nickname Chicken in New Mexico, and South Bend police started calling her Mama Chickie, and that stuck. I mentioned that Mama Chickie discovered South Bend in the 1920s. There were a few articles about her at that time, including this one. These two are the earliest articles that I could find about Miss Edith McShann. It was 1926, so in this arrest, she was 27 years old. Arrested in a house of ill fame on Division Street, which was changed to Western Avenue. This is right around nowadays Four Winds Field. So as early as the roaring 20s, Edith McShann, the future Madam of South Bend, would make her presence known on Western Avenue. Now this one cracks me up. She was arrested once again in the same 600 block of Western Avenue, but this time she and an accomplice were arrested for robbing a man of $18. And you have to just be a little curious about the circumstances. Two young women robbed a guy on Western Avenue. $18, that's about $300 today, so that's not chump change. The title from this Chicago Tribune article from 1927 shows that you did not want to mess with Miss Edith McShann. Woman slices policeman with razor. At 27, 28 years old, she's out there using aliases, telling police she's Hispanic, and it says that she's wanted in Mexico for stabbing 3 men, one fatally, in Kansas City for stabbing a policeman, in Lansing, Michigan for shooting a man, in South Bend, Indiana on a robbery charge, and in Chicago on charges of robbing, shooting, and throwing a solution of lye at a man. And from what I can gather, she didn't do any jail time for any of these. The longest time she ever served was a year when she cut another girl almost to death in Chicago fighting over a man. For another 20 years, there was no mention of Edith in the newspapers. But starting in the 1940s and 50s, there were several articles that once again showed that old Edith McShann was not a woman to be messed with. Like here, in 1943, a guy crashed his car on Eddy and Jefferson Boulevard because he was apparently a bit confused because of a concussion he received earlier after getting hit in the head with a hammer by none other than Edith McShann. And at this time, she was 44 years old. Now, I'm 45 right now, and I actively try every day to avoid drama. And old Edith McShann, she was just getting started. Like here, in 1944, at the age of 45, she knifed a woman in a quarrel. Or in 1950, she stabbed a woman in the back and put her in the hospital. During this time, she was also arrested several times for selling liquor illegally and running houses of ill fame. Like this 1955 article, which is the first one that mentioned anything about her nickname, and it printed it as Mrs. Edith Chicken McShann. Being a 60-plus-year-old woman didn't stop her from being a target from robbers either. Well, rolling around in Cadillacs wearing mink coats probably didn't help too much either. Like in 1962, she was robbed of mink and muskrat coats valued at what is today $8,500, which would tell me that she was quite successful in her profession by that time. Or in 1966, she was targeted again, this time at her Pine Street home. Now imagine your 66-year-old mother or grandmother at home, and 3 guys trying to barge in and then drawing a gun and firing into her home. But see, that's just another day for Mama Chickie near Chapin and Western. From what I can find, in 1967, there was a big debate about the vice around the Chapin and Western area. Obviously drugs and gambling, but also prostitution. But not if you ask the mayor. According to this June 1967 article, Mayor Lloyd Allen said that gambling, betting, and prostitution were at its lowest ebb in 15 years. Well, within a few months, in late 1967, the Tribune ran a series of stories about the prostitution and vice in the area that were the opposite of what the mayor had said a few months prior. An article noted that priests from St. Patrick's Church were getting accosted by women when they were on their walks. Another article noted that businesses along Chapin were closing because of the prostitution. One mentioned that a beauty shop had to close on Chapin Street because of the drastic loss of business they experienced when the husbands waiting outside for their wives kept getting propositioned. And by this time, Mama Chickie was operating a house of prostitution, a brothel, in plain sight of the police and the community as a whole. She had been arrested literally dozens of times, but each time she only paid a fine and was released. The public caught on pretty quick and knew that there was some sort of shady business going on. And there obviously was. In Joseph Ditt's article I mentioned earlier, Mama Chickie said that she used to bribe some of the police big shots as much as $1,000. That's a good 10 grand today. And also she confirmed rumors of government officials visiting her place. Some of the articles in the Tribune series mention that to curb the prostitution, gals like Mama Chickie should be charged with a felony and not a misdemeanor. Now, these articles were literally mentioning Mama Chickie by name, her specific address, and what happens there. For example, quote, her residence is commonly referred to on the west side as Mama Chickie's. It is in an area surrounding the 200 block of South Chapin where prostitution is rampant. After all of the public outcry, after a meeting with 40 businessmen, residents of the Chapin Street area, and with the Board of Public Safety, Mayor Lloyd Allen then got serious about it. And this December 18th, 1967 article stated that he has launched a total attack on the problem. Okay, that article where Mayor Allen said that he was launching an attack on the problem was written on December 18th, 1967. To show how serious he was taking it, a mere 2 days later, on December 20th, an article was published detailing the arrest of a 68-year-old Mama Chickie and another 25-year-old woman after a raid at her 316 Pine Street home. Her charges: soliciting and the usual, operating a house of ill fame. And I just love this. 2 days after publicly declaring an attack on the prostitution problem, a raid on the biggest unkept secret in the city, Mama Chickie's brothel on Pine Street, was staged. Not only that, but a big article was printed in the paper, even with pictures of them having to carry Mama Chickie out. It said she was kicking and screaming obscenities. Again, she was 68 years old. To recap, on December 18th, Mayor Allen announced he's getting serious. Then on December 20th, they raided Mama Chickie's brothel. And now, on December 22nd, an article touts, vice activity stands still. I guess that's how you do it. That's how you get rid of prostitution. Well, obviously that didn't get rid of prostitution in the Chapin and Western area. And getting arrested and getting off with a fine was just another day in the office for Mama Chickie. And up to this point, she had been arrested dozens of times for running her house of ill fame. It seems by the mid-70s, her legendary status had grown even more. I mentioned earlier about how Mama Chickie's story seems like something out of a Hollywood movie. Well, this next story seems like it's straight from a movie. In April of 1974, the South Bend Press Club held its annual Gridiron Dinner. From what I can tell, these dinners were a big deal locally, with almost 1,000 guests, all dressed in their formal wear. The annual Gridiron Dinner was basically a roast of the who's who of, for lack of a better term, local celebrities. They'd have a head table of those guests, and the host would, one by one, roast them. At that dinner in April of 1974, there was quite the esteemed panel of local celebrities at that head table getting roasted. I'll name a few. Birch Bayh, who was a United States Senator at that time, longtime senator. Ara Parsegian, legendary Notre Dame football coach. Elkhart Mayor Dan Hayes. John Bradamus, longtime congressman. Beth Bowen, the governor of Indiana's wife. Governor Otis Bowen, the governor of Indiana himself. Richard Lugar, who was a very popular mayor of Indianapolis at that time and ended up being a longtime popular Indiana senator. South Bend Mayor Jerry Miller graced them with his presence. Digger Phelps, legendary Notre Dame basketball coach, was at the head table as a guest. And also at the head table, Miss Edith McShann, better known as Mama Chickie. Imagine that. The governor, mayors, senator, congressmen, famous Notre Dame coaches, and then Mama Chickie. The article noted a quip or two from the roast, and the roast master said this about Mama Chickie. Quote, Few people realize that Edith is one of the hidden political leaders in the city. She's known a lot of politicians and her counsel is frequently sought. Mama Chickie was also an early supporter of the Chamber of Commerce Convention Bureau. I can just imagine all of these powerful people and their spouses dressed to the nines, rubbing shoulders, wheeling and dealing during the cocktail hour. And there is Mama Chickie. Again, you just cannot make that up. Around the same time as the press dinner in the mid to late 1970s, once again she was getting arrested frequently in her house of ill fame. And it's mind-boggling to me to read the articles. Edith McShann, 79, arrested on prostitution charges. She's in her late 70s, folks. Man. It's wild to me the amount of notoriety and public attention that surrounded her. This 1977 article was titled, Mama, a Local Legend. It described her multiple arrests over the years and how she kept getting off. There were multiple letters to the editor at that time where people literally wrote the South Bend Tribune voicing their displeasure with Mama Chickie and the attention that she got. There was also this one in support of her, telling the police and everyone just to leave her alone. E.L. from Mishawaka said that folks are probably just jealous of how successful she is in her industry. Heck, even the prosecutor of St. Joseph County was quoted as saying, if she'd write a book, she'd have half of South Bend in trouble. And that would definitely be a bestseller as well. Speaking of prosecutors, here is a candidate for the St. Joe County prosecutor who even held a press conference right in front of the 79-year-old Mama Chickie's Pine Street house. And a mere 2 years later, this is the last arrest of Mama Chickie that I could find, a mere 60 years or so after her first. And it's the only South Bend arrest of hers that I could find that wasn't around the Western and Chapin area. Kind of an end of an era. It was at a Quality Inn. You know, it's just kind of sad that her last arrest wasn't on Pine Street. At the beginning of the video, I shared this 1983 article that the Tribune wrote when her Pine Street brothel was being torn down. After hearing all about the shenanigans that went down around this house, now you know why they sent a reporter out there. After the article about the house being torn down in 1983, there was nothing else mentioned in the Tribune until 1999 when Mama Chickie turned 100. Now, as I've mentioned, Joseph Ditz wrote a wonderful 3-page article about Mama Chickie and her life. And if this doesn't sum everything up, on her 100th birthday, Congressman Tim Romer wrote her a congratulatory birthday message on his own personal stationery. Oh, man. The article said that she retired in her late 80s, moved into public housing, and attended church weekly. She had some friends that took her dancing to blues and jazz bars into her early 90s. At 96, she moved into this apartment building on Notre Dame Avenue, which was then a nursing home, across from the former St. Joseph Hospital, now St. Joe High School. What's wild is, even at 100 years old, Mama Chickie was still stirring up drama once again. The Joseph Ditz article that I shared caused quite the commotion, as there were at least 20 different letters to the editor, once again, arguing against glorifying people like Mama Chickie. Even another South Bend Tribune columnist, Nancy Sulak, wrote a scathing article about her in response to the 100th birthday article. Then, there were also other letters from people who applauded the Tribune for writing the article. Then only 3 months after her 100th birthday, Mama Chickie passed away. She's buried in Highland Cemetery off of Portage Road in South Bend. And as you can see, it's just another grave among many. But I'm sure most didn't live a life like Mama Chickie. I thank you so much for spending your valuable time watching. I truly hope that you enjoyed it and learned a little bit about a piece of our local history. I never thought that I would learn so much about South Bend's most infamous madam, but I had a blast learning about Mama Chickie and her life. I definitely want to thank the South Bend Tribune for their articles. Without them, it would be very difficult to tell our local stories. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and share. Again, be sure to check out the Round the Bend Now and Then podcast, wherever you listen to your podcasts or at the link in this video's notes. Thank you once again for watching.